On October 7th, 2023, Hamas carried out an attack on Israel, killing over 1,000 and taking at least 150 hostages. We know now at this time that at least 29 Americans were killed. The attack marked another dangerous escalation in the ongoing conflict between Israel and Hamas and the persistent volatility of the situation in the region. My name is Savannah Lane, Director of Education and Experiences here at the Policy Circle, and with me today to help us better understand this developing and critical situation in the Middle East is Enia Krivine. Enia Krivine is the Senior Director of the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies Israel Program and National Security Network, joining us from Tel Aviv. Enia, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks so much for having me. It's great to be here.
Help our community and our audience better understand a little bit of the historical context of this crisis. Can you share just a bit of background and also share more about what is Hamas? What is this terrorist organization?
Sure. So thanks so much. It's a great place to start. So Hamas is an Iran-backed terror regime. It was established in 1987 with the intention, and the charter established was the basic tenet was to destroy the state of Israel, which it does not recognize. It refers to Israel as the Zionist regime or the Zionist entity. And since its inception, it has had one goal, and that is to destroy the state of Israel. It was designated as a foreign terrorist organization by the U.S. in 1987, having killed hundreds of Israelis and also American citizens. Hamas is based in Gaza today. Much of the leadership is in the diaspora, so outside of Gaza. You have leaders of Hamas in Qatar. You have leaders of Hamas in Turkey and in southern Lebanon. They enjoy sort of diplomatic immunity in the Arab world, but in the U.S. and in Israel, they have blood on their hands and not welcome in those countries. In the Hamas charter, it lays out very specifically that their goal is to establish a Palestinian state from the river to the sea. And what's interesting is you see this from the river to the sea. You see it out there in social media and on college campuses, and it sounds benign, but if you look at it closely, from the river to the sea essentially means getting rid of the Jewish state and getting rid of the Jews that live there. So from the river, Jordan, which is the eastern boundary of sort of Palestine, to the sea, which is the Mediterranean Sea, the western boundary. When they talk about from the river to the sea, they're essentially talking about ethnic cleansing of Jews in that territory. So they are a genocidal terrorist organization. And I think we can see from the events over the past 10 days what exactly they're made of, and the fact that when people say they want to commit genocide and kill Jews and terrorize a people, we should take them at their word. And that's something that I think the Jewish people should have understood by now. But every now and then you need a reminder. And here in Israel, that very tragic reminder came on October 7th.
Thank you. And certainly a tragic, and we're seeing the events continue to unfold. This really is a focal point of the Gaza Strip for this conflict right now. Can you explain the significance? You touched on this a little bit, but explain the significance of Gaza in the role in the Israeli-Hamas conflict, and what you might expect to see in the next few weeks and even coming days.
Yeah, sure. So first, a little bit about Gaza. I don't think there's a lot of understanding in the international community about what Gaza is. Gaza is it's a piece of land that's about twice the size of Manhattan. It has 20 plus miles of Mediterranean coastline. It's an ancient civilization. Civilization has been in Gaza for thousands of years. It was a seaport. It has many different empires have ruled over that port in Gaza. And when Israel was established in 1948, there was many Palestinian people, Arabs, who were living in Israel, who fled or were pushed out by the state of Israel. And they went largely to the West Bank and to the region we're talking about now, Gaza. As that happened, the state of Israel was established. And then you had these two Palestinian entities, the West Bank, which was then occupied and ruled by Jordan. And Gaza, which was occupied and ruled by Egypt, and the Palestinian populations largely remained there. After 1967, Israel conquered large swaths of land. It tripled the size of the country after defeating Egypt in Egypt's attempt to destroy Israel. And included in the land that it took from Egypt as it expanded south and west was Gaza. So eventually, Israel made peace with Egypt. It did a land for peace swap. So Egypt signed peace. Israel ceded vast amounts of territory. And Israel said, why don't you take Gaza? And the Egyptians said, no, thank you. Let's keep Gaza where it is, and the population of Palestinians can remain an Israeli issue. So Israel remained with Gaza as a part of it. It occupied Gaza, and it remained under Israeli occupation or control until 2005. And during that period, the population of Gaza expanded. There was an openness. I have family that grew up very close to that border on the Israeli side that used to do their shopping in Gaza and used to go swimming in Gaza because the beaches were beautiful and there was a lot of freedom of movement. And all that changed with the Oslo agreements. And during the Oslo agreements is when they decided to close off. Oslo was essentially an attempt to build a Palestinian state that would be responsible for the populations in Gaza and the West Bank. So the Gaza and the West Bank were closed. There was a temporary border put up along the sort of mutually agreed upon trajectory, and the movement between Gaza and Israel slowed considerably. In 2005, Israel made the decision to end the occupation. It withdrew unilaterally from Gaza. There was a security analysis made that it was no longer, Israelis couldn't stand the international pressure encouraging them to withdraw, to end the occupation of Gaza. And it also was losing troops because they had their soldiers who were occupying Gaza, and there was a security element where young men and women were killed in battle and in terrorist attack in Gaza. So there was a decision made to unilaterally withdraw in 2005, and the situation quickly devolved. They went into elections. They elected a Hamas government, which took everyone by surprise, especially because by then Hamas was already a foreign terrorist designated organization. So it was, the United States was in this situation where they were encouraging the creation of a Palestinian entity in Gaza, the Palestinian state. And then lo and behold, the people elected a designated terrorist organization that the U.S. can't support or negotiate with or be involved in. So since the elections right after the Israeli disengagement, Gaza has been largely under Hamas control. And then in 2007, they went ahead and there was a internecine violence, and Hamas took over full control of the Gaza Strip in a bloody confrontation with the other sort of competing movement. And since 2007, it's been lock, stock, and barrel under the control of the Iran-backed terrorist organization Hamas. And that kind of brings us to the status quo, which exists until today, which is you have the Gaza Strip ruled by Hamas, different from the West Bank. The Palestinian Authority, which was established during the Oslo Peace Agreement, still remain in the West Bank. But you have Gaza essentially devolving into almost a failed state because of the terrible misuse of their resources. The international community largely funds Gaza and the Hamas regime in Gaza. And instead of using the resources to build schools or develop farming or create some sort of horizon for the people that live there, they've invested heavily in weapons and rockets and terror tunnels. And the elite in Gaza, the Hamas elite, live very comfortably. And unfortunately, the rest of the people, the civilians of Gaza, don't have much going for them. And that is unfortunately where we found ourselves today, at least until 10 days ago. And then 10 days ago, under Hamas leadership, directed by Iran, the Hamas terrorists created unthinkable atrocities in Israel. It was something really that Israelis could have never seen or imagined, worse than ISIS, using some of the same chants and same language and same terror tactics that we saw ISIS using in sort of the around 2014 when ISIS was sort of peaking in the Middle East. And I think Israelis are still reeling from the shock. Of course, they took almost 200 hostages back to Gaza. Israel is now trying to figure out what it has to do to get the hostages back.
Well, thank you for sharing such an in-depth overview. One of the importance of Gaza in this historical context and in the conflict moving forward. You mentioned a couple things that I think are important to unpack. One of which, obviously, is the support of Iran with Hamas in this region. But really something that has really been a focal point of conversation, social media, in the news is what comes next. I mean, we know that there are hostages in Gaza. There are also civilians. So talk to us a little bit about what you think is coming next, or what we can anticipate, particularly in relation to the concern of the civilian toll that this conflict has already taken and will continue to take.
Yeah, so it's very interesting, getting your feet on the ground here and seeing how Israelis feel about this. It has been a really interesting experience for me. I've been in Tel Aviv for a week now. You have this tricky situation where 200 hostages are in Gaza, many of whom are children, babies, elderly, disabled people, and their families are in Israel. Now, Israel's a small country. It's about the size of New Jersey. It's got a population of 9 million. It's a very tight-knit, country. And there's not a single family that has not been affected by the murder of the 1,300 people in southern Israel 10 days ago. There's really not a single family who hasn't been touched in some way. And if they weren't touched by the initial attack, if they don't know someone who's been kidnapped or murdered or burned alive in their house, then they know someone who has now gone to the front. Israel conducted a massive mobilization of 300,000 troops. It's its fastest and largest mobilization in history. And, I have people dear to me who are there now. And so I am also sort of experiencing what that feels like. And I can tell you that the pictures out of Gaza are horrifying. And I feel deeply for the people of Gaza, the innocent people of Gaza. But I also know that every day that Israel does not go into Gaza, every day it keeps its troops on the Israeli side of the border and takes out targets and terror infrastructure and weapons caches and buildings that are booby-trapped. And these are all tactics that we've seen before in previous conflicts that Israel's fought with terrorist organizations in the West Bank and Gaza, much of which has been spearheaded by Hamas. Every single day that the soldiers wait to go in, it's going to be safer for them when they do go in. And so you have this situation where Gaza is under siege. Many people have said that Gaza's been under siege. In fact, some very educated and well-read people, I've heard them say Gaza's been under siege for 17 years. Gaza's been under siege for 10 days. The siege was in response to the massive kidnappings, rape, murder, pillaging, brutalizing, burning people alive, killing babies in their beds, slitting open the stomachs of pregnant women. I'm sorry to say it, but I think it needs to be said. And the siege was in response to that, in an attempt to coerce the Hamas government to give up these hostages. So the siege is a tactic of war. It is not a pretty tactic. I don't think anyone is taking any pleasure in it, but it is the responsibility and duty of the Israeli government to do everything they can to try and get those hostages back. So they conducted a siege. They've been bombing Gaza, trying to destroy terrorist infrastructure, and it is heartbreaking. And yet, everyone here knows that there is a greater chance of their father, brother, son, uncle, loved one, boyfriend, husband. There's a greater chance of them coming home if Israel prosecutes this war with a single goal, and that is to degrade and destroy Hamas. And if when the soldiers eventually do go in, everyone knows there's going to be heavy losses, but the hope is they'll be able to bring the hostages back.
Thank you so much. And it's surreal hearing these details. Obviously, we've been following the news, we see the updates, but having your perspective and particularly the feelings of what it is like being in Israel right now, it's unimaginable. We've heard the developments from your perspective and what it is like, the palpable, emotions that you're seeing in Israel now, and also what to anticipate with Israel's response in Gaza. But let's zoom out a bit. Let's look at, what may be a factor of risk from Hezbollah, other regional actors like Egypt. What are you thinking about or anticipating in the coming weeks, months, or even years?
Thanks. So, yeah, it's interesting. This is a region full of people that have a stake in what happens to the Palestinians, because you have two countries on Israel's border that Israel has peace with. That would be Jordan and Egypt. And both of them have a very serious stake in the outcome of what's going on now in Gaza. You can make the argument that everyone in the region does, but if you want to zoom in on Jordan and Egypt for 1 second, Gaza has a long border with Israel, right? But it also has a border with Egypt. And this is something that gets underlooked all the time because Gaza has been under a blockade for many years. Because it was bringing in weapons, munitions, explosives, and by sea. And so Israel initiated a blockade of Gaza, and all the goods that go to Gaza, a lot of the sort of health and medical goods and some food and other sources come through the Israeli border, and they check it to make sure there's no weapons in it. By the way, they find weapons the whole time. Weapons and explosives and other drugs and other illicit activity, but it's all checked. So essentially, Israel is the entry point. And everyone talks about, oh, Israel this and Israel that, and Israel doesn't let people in and Israel doesn't let people out, and Gaza. But no one talks about the fact that Gaza has a border with Egypt. And Egypt occupied Gaza between 1948 and 1967. And the people of Egypt are very close to the people of Gaza, and many people in Gaza trace their roots back to Egypt. And the dialect of Gaza is very close to the dialect of Egypt, and it's no surprise considering that A, it was occupied by Egypt for decades, and B, that many people are originally from Egypt. So Egypt has a huge role to play in this, and I think that unless you sort of understand the context and some of the history and the geography over there, it can be very confusing. So you have one civilian possibility for civilian passage into Israel on the Israeli side, and you have one on the Egyptian side. And right now, the Egyptian one is closed. And generally speaking, the Egyptians are not welcoming of the Gazan people. If Gazans want to go to Cairo or get an international flight, it's a bureaucratic process to get that ability to pass through the Egyptian gate. And the relations between Hamas and the Egyptian leadership are not great, and that tracks back to Hamas being an offshoot of the Muslim Brotherhood. And of course, Egypt's current leader, who essentially had to overthrow a Muslim Brotherhood leader in order to get his position as the premier of Egypt, ruling from Cairo. So you have this very complicated power dynamic where the people of Gaza are very connected to Egypt, but they have kind of an antagonistic relationship with the Egyptian leadership. And the fact that perhaps the best way for them to have a humanitarian corridor right now would be into Egypt. And that's what Secretary Blinken has been discussing with the Egyptian leader, Sisi, in the recent days. So that's Egypt. And I think that whatever is going to happen and whatever ultimate solution there is for the people of Gaza after Hamas is... Oh, I have a red alert.
All right, we did pause our recording. I think it's important to share with our audience because we had rocket sirens interrupting. And so, Enia, tell us about your experience. Obviously, you are in Israel right now on the ground, and this is the reality that people are experiencing. So share a little bit about what this means for the conflict, expanding perhaps in other parts of Israel, Tel Aviv, Jerusalem. We're hearing of rockets. So talk about your experience and what this means for the conflict.
Sure, thanks. So yeah, I'm currently in Tel Aviv. Tel Aviv is a big city in Israel. The Tel Aviv and its metropolitan area have about 2 million Israelis in it, and I'm really at the heart of Tel Aviv on the beach. Tel Aviv has not so far been hard hit by this conflict. There's been, I believe, 8 sirens. That means that different parts of that means that the part of Tel Aviv that I'm in has been affected. So the system, just a little bit of background, the system in Israel is so sophisticated. They've been dealing with this threat for so long that as soon as a rocket is launched and it's is detected by Israel's systems, a siren will go off in the exact location where it's supposed to land. That is to say that earlier today, I went out to have a meeting with a colleague, and I was away from the apartment where I'm staying for an hour. And while I was gone, 20 minutes away, there was a siren that was heard in the apartment, but I didn't hear at the coffee shop I was at. So it's very, very specific. Sometimes they'll go off in eastern Tel Aviv or southern Tel Aviv, but not in the section that I'm in. So it's very sophisticated. Tel Aviv's has had about an average of 1 a day. Today, there's been 2. And these rockets are coming from Gaza. Gaza has a significant arsenal of rockets. It's estimated to have, I've heard experts give an estimate of 25,000 rockets. And so far in this conflict, it's fired 6. So it has plenty more left. And most of the rockets are what they call them dumb rockets, right? They're kind of, you shoot them and hope that it lands somewhere and kills someone on the other end. And hopefully not that many long range rockets that have a little bit more oomph can get further across the country. And then, but they obviously have some, because they would have to be a long range rocket to hit Tel Aviv. And as I said, there's been 1 or 2 a day. On the other hand, Hezbollah in the north, which is the terrorist regime that is in control of southern Lebanon and most of Lebanon itself today, they have 150,000 rockets in their arsenal. So today, Hezbollah fired, or in the early hours of the morning or late last night, Hezbollah fired 6 anti-tank missiles at Israel. Israel responded with air fire sent in the Israeli Air Force and took out Hezbollah infrastructure in southern Lebanon. And what all of the Israelis are watching, and probably many in the region, is whether this turns into a second front for Israel. Because, of course, Hamas, with an arsenal of is not a sophisticated adversary, has an arsenal of probably 20 to 25,000 rockets. Hezbollah is a very sophisticated adversary. They're battle-hardened military. They're the most powerful non-state military actor in the Middle East. They have a huge capacity. They have a huge barrage of rockets they could potentially fire at Israel. They have 150,000 rockets in their arsenal, including several hundred precision-guided missiles, which could hit within an accuracy of within 10 meters. So right now is, I just 1 rocket a day. I've got 90 seconds to get to a shelter, and I know the Iron Dome has 95% chance of intercepting it. Life can almost go on. But if there's a real hot war with Hezbollah, then the reality for Israelis all over the country will change immediately. And Israel's a tiny country. I said before, it's about the size of New Jersey. Its infrastructure is all pretty confined into a small area. So if Hezbollah is assumed to have a few hundred precision-guided rockets, we don't know if the Iron Dome is going to be effective in taking those out. We don't know if the other layers of missile defense protection that Israel has can tackle them either. So when you're looking at a country with a couple power stations, couple dozen hospitals, a couple dozen major energy plants or sewage plants, and you're looking at an arsenal of 700 precision guided missiles, it's a lot more daunting.
Certainly daunting, and we're just happy that you're safe to be able to share these thoughts. We will keep your colleagues and loved ones in our thoughts and prayers here. Enia, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing more about the latest of this conflict and really understanding the historical context of the Israel-Hamas conflict and the developments that we can expect moving forward. To learn more and to follow our resources, including a brief on the Middle East, as well as an understanding of terror groups and rogue states, you can visit the Policy Circle's website, www.thepolicycircle.org. You can also visit the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies from Enia's organization, which is fdd.org. We will include it in the show notes and description in YouTube. Thank you so much.